Hello, I'm Gordon Burghardt, and I'm here to talk to you a bit about the Scopes Trial that was held in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925, and evolution versus creationism in East Tennessee. I'm honored to be speaking at the Scopes Trial Centennial Celebration sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Tennessee. An early and direct connection of East Tennessee with religion and the religion evolution issue in the aftermath of Darwin's Origin of Species and Descent of Man were books such as this one by Joseph LeConte, who was a famous geology and University of California professor. He was born in Georgia, and Mount LeConte in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is named after him. But he was also very interested in the relationships between religion and evolution. And also, he was a co-founder with John Muir of the Sierra Club. Now, tonight's agenda is to first talk about some formative experiences I had related to evolution prior to coming to the University of Tennessee in 1967, some selected stories about the Scopes trial, as well as a roughly chronological sampling of some personal campus and local area events and controversies on creationism and evolution, some conclusions drawn from these many decades, and then some comments from Dr. Gary McCracken on his experiences at UT, especially with the state legislature, campus administration, and teaching the Evolution and Society course, and an opportunity for any in the audience to comment, question, discuss, or make additional observations. Unfortunately, the audio failed in recording the talk, so the last two items, as well as Gary's introduction, are absent from this redo. Here, Gary McCracken and I are greeting Darwin at the beginning of the talk. For many years, I taught the psychology of religion class, and I would often always begin with this description of how I viewed science. The term as we understand it today did not even exist until the 19th century. Today's definition of science and the conception of how it operates is debated by philosophers of science, but the way scientists have operated over the last 100 years is clear. A central tenet of modern science is methodological naturalism. It seeks to explain the universe purely in terms of observed or testable natural mechanisms. Science needs to be public and replicable. Yet this is not always so, and the fossilized remains of earlier science, sometimes called natural philosophy, are behind many current controversies. A naturalistic approach is not to be equated with reductionism or scientism, which is that rationalistic science is the only way of knowing. So I grew up at a religious time in the Midwest, specifically Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I went to a Sunday school for many years, raised as a Lutheran, and I always had questions about animals because I loved them. I had as pets turtles, lizards, snakes. I raised a raccoon. I had baby orphaned birds and bunnies, and these animals would die. And of course, I was concerned that shouldn't they go to heaven too? And I also had concerns about evolution because I was told in my Sunday school classes by some teachers that unequivocally 24 hours in the Bible meant 24-hour days, and there was no question about it. Others would say that, well, these days could probably be millions of years. But nonetheless, the order of creation was the same. A little confusing. Things didn't clear up in high school. I went at a biology class where we didn't discuss evolution very much. The biology teacher was the high school football coach and also ran a hot dog stand on the side, and a very nice fellow. We kept reptiles including snakes and a caiman in the biology classroom. But we didn't really talk about evolution. But in 1959, I went off to college, and an immediately transformative event occurred. For instance, when I arrived at the University of Chicago in September 1959, I did not know about the Darwin celebration to take place during the exact week in November that the Origin of Species had been published 100 years earlier. Besides seeing many leading scholars and scientists, including, if you notice, the grandsons of both Charles Darwin and Thomas Huxley, I vividly recall a small gathering at Hillel House discussing religion and science with Alfred Emerson, then the leading termite researcher known for his superorganism views, and F. Clark Howell, a leading human evolution researcher. This was heady stuff for a beginning chemistry major. I later saw John T. Scopes himself the following year when a documentary on the conference was premiered on campus along with a discussion on teaching evolution in which he participated. The resulting 3 volumes that came out of the conference had contributions by many important scientists of the day, biologists, social scientists, anthropologists, psychologists, and others. It's a very useful source even today. Our college yearbook, the Cap and Gown, was very interested in this conference, and just a few pages from the picture of me playing the timpani in the orchestra was a picture of Julian Huxley in the pulpit of Rockefeller Chapel on the University of Tennessee campus giving a talk. This is very controversial because he had been known by many of the clergy as not being very friendly to religion. In fact, he wrote a book called Religion Without Revelation. And so his talk was quite controversial, but students loved it and put it into our yearbook. He began innocuously enough. He said, "This is, so far as I'm aware, the first time when authorities on the evolutionary aspects of the 3 great branches of scientific study, the inorganic sciences, the life sciences, and the human sciences, have been brought together for mutual criticism and joint discussion." The rest of the talk was generally a pretty standard explication of religion and of evolution and its importance in our modern world. But near the end, he did give a very provocative comment. Religion of some sort is probably necessary, but not necessarily a good thing. It is not a good thing when the Hindu I read about this spring killed his son as a religious sacrifice. It is not a good thing that religious pressure has made it illegal to teach evolution in Tennessee because it conflicts with the fundamentalist beliefs. It is not a good thing that in Connecticut and Massachusetts, women should be subject to grievous suffering because Roman Catholic pressure refuses to allow even doctors to give information on birth control, even to non-Catholics. It was not a good thing for Christians to persecute and even burn heretics. It is not a good thing when communism, in its dogmatic religious aspect, persecutes and even executes deviationists. So one may now appreciate how the presence of this conference at his university greatly influenced this naive first-year student to find support for his love of animals and antipathy to dogmatic religious and anti-scientific thought. Ironically, at that time in 1959, I had no idea that in 1914 Julian Huxley had written a foundational paper at the onset of ethology, the field of animal behavior to which I was destined to devote my life. Huxley's paper on his observations of courtship, communication, virtualization, and behavioral evolution of birds inspired the Royal Society of London Symposium on Virtualization that he organized 52 years later, in 1966, extending the concept of virtualization he co-discovered to human culture. Wikipedia had an interesting article on this conference stating the public response to most aspects of the celebration, with the exception of Huxley's controversial speech, was very positive. However, the event also reinvigorated American creationism. Henry Morris, a co-author of the influential 61 Young Earth creationism book, The Genesis Flood, would later credit the Darwin Centennial Celebration for making clear the threat posed by evolutionary science. So now let's go back to 1925. In that year, this book appeared, Science, Religion, and Reality, with chapters by very eminent people of the day, anthropologists like Malinowski, as well as physical scientists, psychologists, biologists, and theologians. It's a very balanced and interesting book that will be very useful in courses yet today, I believe. The epigraph of the book is from Blaise Pascal. Two extravagances, to exclude reason, to omit only reason. I'm not going to go into what the book covered, except to talk a little bit about the opening and the closing chapters. The introduction was by the Chancellor of Cambridge University, who stated that no readers of the book would accept that the Bible, inspired as it is, provides a literal and infallible account and quotes faultless anticipation of sciences still unborn. Yet he writes that a science which declares itself incompatible with religion, a religion which deems itself a substitute for science, may indulge in controversies as interminable as they are barren. The authors in this book, in their diverse ways, pursue a better way. The concluding chapter was by the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. He summarizes all the chapters and the various perspectives presented, stating that the goal of the book, quotes, of indicating possible terms of peace or modus vivendi between religion and science was largely successful, and quotes, one is inclined to feel confident that a reconciliation is much nearer than it seemed 50 years ago. Could this be an example of how wrong and out of touch elites can be? For in that very same year, the Butler Act was passed in Tennessee. Now, the Butler Act, an exact wording is this, that it shall be unlawful for any teacher in any of the universities, normals, and all other public schools of the state which are supported in whole or in part by the public school funds of the state, to teach any theory that denies the story of the living creation of man, divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man is descended from a lower order of animals. It was passed in the House by 71-5 and by the Senate overwhelmingly 24-6 and signed by Governor Austin Peay in March of 1925. Austin Peay is the former administration building at the University of Tennessee, and it's where the psychology department in my office are located this very day. It was still on the books when I interviewed for my position at the University of Tennessee, and at that time, prospective faculty members met with very high administrators, and I had a meeting with the vice president of the university, and I asked him about teaching evolution. I said, I'm going to teach evolution. I don't care what the laws state. And he assured me, he said, don't worry, no one's going to bother you. You can teach whatever you want. But there's a little bit of history here. For 1923, even before the Butler Act, there was a controversy on the University of Tennessee campus about the dismissal of a Professor Sproul's for teaching evolution. Students complained that he was teaching that humans were around for 150,000 years or more, and earlier versions of humans, and that actually much of our behavior was derived from earlier vertebrate ancestors. The president of the university, Morgan, and Dean Hoskins then prohibited the teaching of evolution on campus and even prohibited sale of books in the bookstore. In the end, 7 professors were dismissed. At its 1925 meeting, the AAUP said none of the dismissals were justified, criticized conditions at the University of Tennessee, and leveled the strongest penalty applied by the American Association of University Professors to any university at the time. Interestingly, buildings on campus are now named for all 3, Austin Peay, Morgan, and Hoskins. The Butler Act remained on the books until 1967, when teacher Gary Scott of Jacksboro, Tennessee, who had been dismissed for violating the act, sued for reinstatement, citing his First Amendment right to free speech. Although his termination was quickly rescinded, Scott continued his fight with a class action lawsuit in the Nashville Federal District Court seeking a permanent injunction. Within 3 days of his filing suit, a bill for repeal of the Butler Act was rushed through both houses of the Tennessee legislature and signed into law by Governor Buford Ellington. This was about a month after I accepted a job at the University of Tennessee. Campus also had a building named after Ellington on the Ag campus. On arrival at the University of Tennessee in 1967, I soon met George Schweitzer, who recently died after teaching here for 76 years. He was a chemist, but he had many other interests. In fact, he received degrees in philosophy, history of science, and very interested in theology, and very active in his own church. A really wonderful and super nice guy. We attended together an evening discussion of science and religion where zoology professor Roland Bagby, who was a very devout Presbyterian, spoke on the Bible, the Ten Commandments, and evolution. Comic cartoons promoting creationism were available. George and I hatched a plan, never consummated, to develop our own comic strips. By the way, Roland was one of 3 creationist zoology professors at the University of Tennessee while I was there. So here's an example of some of the cartoon materials that were available, and these were provided by Duane Gish, who was basically Morris's bulldog. For instance, this one regales an incident at the University of California at Davis where he was going to come and speak, and students were all excited. Lots of them came and appeared. They were surprised there were so many attendees. And Gish made his spiel that science needs to consider all explanations and that students are being indoctrinated and they need to have evidence for both creation and evolution. So we went through a usual creationist litany of no evidence of missing links, some mistakes and frauds, which actually show science to be self-correcting when errors occur. Of course, one of the examples is that there's no transition between fish and vertebrate animals with legs, and 25 years later, Neil Schumann discovered tilak, a fish that walked on land, and this was presented as devastating evidence at the Dover, Pennsylvania Intelligence Design Trial that occurred later. He also made the point that that God made the earth just perfectly suitable for conditions of living animals and plants. The specific distance from sun, its size, the water, the axis tilting, the ozone layer protecting us from killer rays from the sun, and an exquisitely designed temperature regime. In fact, he said that if the average temperature of the Earth was raised by 2 or 3 degrees, you could kiss goodbye to many of the big cities in the north, and floods would occur, glaciers would melt, and so on. Interestingly, many other creationists believe that God would never allow the world to increase in temperature and remove the factors that provide for life. Also, not too long after, in 1975 was the 50th anniversary of the Dayton trial, and they had a wonderful reenactment at the courthouse in Dayton, Tennessee, where the trial took place, and it was a wonderful evening. But my main takeaway was the music by the Morgans, who graciously sent me a cassette of songs in 1975 that they played at the event that I just recently digitized and accompany this talk. A few years later, we were hosting the annual meeting of the Animal Behavior Society here at the University of Tennessee, and I was part of the local host committee, which included people from zoology, psychology, and forestry, wildlife, and fisheries. Neil Greenberg did all the artwork for the programming and the t-shirts, etc. And we went all in on the evolution issue in Tennessee, including a field trip to Dayton and renting a 16mm print of Inherit the Wind. Not that easy to accomplish then as compared to now. We had a variety of other sources of information for the attendees about Dayton and the trial. At the banquet for the trial, I presented postcards. At each place setting, there was a postcard that was obtained from Robinson's Drugstore. Robinson's Drugstore is the place where the trial was hatched. And I was able to sit at the actual table having ice cream where the event planning occurred. There's pictures also of the courthouse back then. So there were 8 different postcards, and I got a big bunch of all of them to present to all the attendees at the banquet. Other postcards depicted George Raphaela, who instigated the challenge to the anti-evolution law. He was a local geologist and ACLU member, and well as William Jennings Bryan, who defended the law, and Clarence Darrow, who led the defense. And here are some other scenes from the event, from the trial itself. But the main feature of the banquet was a performance by the Morgans, aided by mandolin legend Red Rector, of the 1920s music played at the 1975 reenactment. Here are the words for some of these songs, one of which that I played at the beginning, and another you'll hear at the end. But some of the verses are rather interesting. You can check out verse 4 of There Ain't No Bugs in Me, which was not sung by the Morgans. The banquet did not get much local press, but it did make it into an article by a visitor to Dayton and attendee at the banquet. How the creationists would have loved the banquet. Here was a hall full of 300 scientists merrily tapping their toes, singing anti-evolution songs from the late 20s. It praised the Morgans and their work, saying that the songs led us all in a rousing enunciation of the science we all lived and supported. There may be monkeys in some of you guys, but there ain't no monkey in me. During this time, in Arkansas, there was the Equal Time for Creationism bill being tried, and a lot of letters occurred, including the most prolific letter writers to the local paper were the Glens. And they had horrible things to say about evolutionists and evolution. This got to be very annoying. So I contacted the Glens and I called them up and I said, hey, why not come to the university and talk about evolution and your ideas with the faculty and students, and we could inform us and we could have a little dialogue. And immediately they said, well, we're elderly and we don't get out much, and so it's not possible that we could come to the university. And actually, we don't really know that much about science, but our materials were just versions of what we were sent in the mail from various quarters, and they really were just not willing to discuss, but just pontificate. And then came the debate. In 1982, there was a debate on campus between Harold Schlusser from the Institute for Creation Research, co-author of the creationist biology textbook called Biology: A Search for Order and Complexity, and John Tulloch, who was a UT biology instructor, and was sponsored by creationists on UT campus, organized by Mr. Sheffield of Fountain of Youth Ministries. And so I made contact with him to get permission to distribute a questionnaire for attendees to get their views on evolution and our similarities to other animals and their behavior, intelligence, and emotions. This was a survey that I had been giving out in my classes for some years and in other gatherings as well. So these are passed out at the door by my grad students. But I also prepared a separate handout to give attendees as they approached Alumni Gym that called out some of the outrageous claims being made about the evils of evolution and their supporters. This was distributed by Paul Weldon, another graduate student. This double-sided leaflet was what was handed out by Paul. And I wrote it, and it included, I began with a quote from the Bible: "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And I claim that people associated with the Institute for Creation Research are noted for their documented misquotes, errors, and general scientific ignorance. They twist, distort, and ridicule the work of honest scientists. If this doesn't work, they accuse those they disagree with of being partners with Satan. Is this fair? Is this Christian? Is this American? And then I go on to explain the need to critically evaluate evidence for yourself. I also included a review of Schlusser's book, which began reasonably enough, but ended rather sarcastically, was a statement that, at any rate, we see that creationist claims of circular reasoning are possibly pure subterfuge, or they may indicate an incredible lack of common sense on the part of the authors. Of course, the foregoing hypotheses are not mutually exclusive. And I ended with a quotation from Henry Morse, where explicitly says that Satan is behind the ideas of evolution. Newspaper, the student newspaper did have an article on this, and as you might expect, the Origins of Life debate fails to resolve the issue. It turned out to be more of a discussion of physics and thermodynamics than actual biological evolution, because Schlusser was a physical scientist, not really a biologist at all, and was not about to really discuss those kinds of issues. There was a little known backstory about my student Paul Weldon, who became one of the most productive PhD students from my laboratory. Paul died of heart failure in December of 22. He was not only a good friend, but the person handing out the leaflet at the creation debate, which led to some problems. And I'm going to read a short excerpted capsule from the comments I made at his memorial service, based on notes I wrote right after the debate. On the night of the event, local churches bussed in congregants from around East Tennessee, outnumbering the UT participants. There were about 600 at this event. Students were out welcoming folks with survey forms, and others, especially Paul, the two-sided sheet with my critique that also asked listeners to keep an open mind. This did not go well for Paul. After I left to make a call from my office, Paul had an encounter with Mr. Sheffield and others that left him very upset, but he wasn't willing to discuss when I returned to the debate. The event went on, the creationists felt they won, of course, and the survey results were eventually combined with others and published in a paper on the implications of the growing research on mental continuity across human and non-human animals. Paul still remained quiet. But at midnight that night, Paul called me and was extremely distraught, saying he had been physically attacked, his papers grabbed and crumpled, and told to leave the debate venue. He felt his civil liberties had been abused and wanted to sue. After trying to calm Paul down and hanging up, I immediately received a call from Mr. Sheffield, apologizing for calling so late, but that since my phone had been busy, he assumed I was still awake. He was rather polite and friendly, stating that all went well, except for the incident with that person distributing the handout that he found personally offensive. He stated that he had been tired, stressed out, and that his behavior being a preacher was very unbecoming, and that I should apologize to Paul when I next saw him. But he did say that he aimed to run an unbiased event, but that no amount of scientific evidence could ever dissuade him from his literal belief in the Bible. There was also much discussion, other discussion in the Daily Beacon on the debate. The most persistent attacker being a physics professor, Hal Rowland. These are the days when the paper is more substantial and widely read than it is today. In fact, it's no longer a Daily Beacon. This letter from E.L. Hart, a professor in physics, is sort of interesting. I am, among other things, an advisor for engineering physics students. Last Friday, a transfer student, a junior from some local religious school, came to see me about transferring credit from courses he had taken here to UT. One of these, a 4.5 credit hour course, was entitled Creation versus Evolution. When I was dubious, he said, "We didn't spend much time on that subject. Most of it was cosmetology." Cosmetology? Yes, about stars and things, he said. No credit. I'm not telling the story to make fun of the student, but to make a point. Which point is up to the reader. John Tulloch wrote a letter describing his disagreements with Dr. Hal Rowland, and there were other letters there saying this whole thing is sort of tiresome. I did calculate the statistics for the survey and presented in a paper where I compared the creationism debate results with those from other undergraduate ethology classes I taught, a winter animal behavior conference of professionals, a small conference of biologists and psychologists trying to integrate their approaches to behavior, and then a creationism seminar that the philosophy department had held in fairly recently. This, of course, is back in 1985 when this article occurred. And you can view the results to see how people agreed or disagreed. Questions were many non-human animals are similar to us in their feelings and emotions. Many non-human animals are similar to us in their intellectual capacities. Many non-human animals are similar to us in their normal behavior patterns. Or non-human animals are too greatly different from us to make any comparisons useful. And you can see that the creationism debate folks were the most skeptical in some respects. But of course, the creationism debate included those on both sides, because there were biologists and students there, faculty, as well as churchgoers. So if you looked at the responses to the questions over all the surveys as to whether people accepted evolution or denied that evolution occurred, you can see the big difference. For instance, in terms of comparison of emotions or feelings, those who accepted evolution were far more accepting that animals and humans were similar. But if you notice that even those who denied evolution still felt that many animals had emotions that could be comparable to us. Maybe they all had pet dogs and cats. In terms of cognitive functions, again, those who accepted evolution were far more prone to agree. In terms of normal behavior, again, those who accepted evolution were much more accepting. And the idea that comparisons between animals and non-humans and humans are useful, again, was more accepted by those who accepted evolution. But even those who denied evolution, maybe thinking about biomedical research and so on, were still willing to say comparisons were useful. Then there was an Oak Ridge National Lab creationist who spoke in the alumni gym on campus in 1987, Robert Gentry, who wrote this book, Creation's Tiny Mystery. The Wikipedia entry opening sentence on Mr. Gentry said, Robert Vance Gentry was an American young Earth creationist and nuclear physicist known for his claims that radio halos provide evidence for a young age of the Earth. He claimed that minute polonium halos in rocks supported the rapid formation of the Earth, disproved traditional aging methods, and support Noah's flood. Although publicly very visible, his work received little credence outside his own mind and was controversial even with fellow creationists. In 1981, he actually testified at the McLean versus Arkansas equal time trial, where he supported the law mandating teaching creation science, which was thrown out by the court as unconstitutional. As he was only a guest scientist at ORNL, his appointment there was then canceled. In 2001, he sued Los Alamos National Laboratory and Cornell University after 10 of his cosmology papers were deleted from a public preprint server. The suit was dismissed by a Tennessee court in 2004. This is a flyer from the publication catalog of the Institute for Creation Research, and you can see there's listing there of various scientists that they claim support their views. We also have our own East Tennessee Creation Science Association, which put out a newsletter, and you'll notice that the most recent one there is from 2001, and it is a rather defunct organization at the moment. But Dr. Glenn Jackson is sort of an interesting person who is an itinerant young Earth creationist who was fired from nearby Carson Newman University, Baptist school, for, as he told me, being too adamant in his anti-evolution beliefs. In 2005, he gave a talk here, sponsored by the Campus Crusade for Christ, titled Frauds in Anthropology on the UT campus. His aim was to expose falsehoods and lies in the McClung Museum Human Evolution exhibit. McClung Museum is on the University of Tennessee campus. He did not count on anthropology professor Andrew Kramer, who had developed the exhibit, to be in the audience. He was totally exposed as the true fraud by Andy. But he kept repeating the lies elsewhere, and as true of most creationists and some current politicians, find success in never admitting they were or even could be wrong. And then there is Dr. Kent Hovland, who in his calling card said that modern science is wrong about the age of the Earth and the place of dinosaurs. He really loved dinosaurs, and so do I. But he claimed that dinosaurs were on the ark with Noah, and after the flood, they were hunted to the point of extinction in most parts of the world, but a few still exist. He was an adherent to cryptozoology. But he now travels and speaks on this topic to try to strengthen the faith of believers, confound and convict the evolutionists, and win the lost to Christ. Ken Hovland was a frequent speaker in churches here in the 80s and finally got to speak in the public schools. And there are two letters here in the local newspaper, one by Mr. Sparks, who said that it's outrageous that the Hovland gained access to the public school science classes. Dr. Hovland asserted that evolution is a religion with no scientific underpinnings, which is the most absurd argument I've ever heard. I believe that evolution occurs. And he actually then quotes Dr. Arthur Ectornot, who was the department head of EEB and as well as of zoology, the evidence is absolutely, completely overwhelming that evolution occurs. Calling it a stupid, dangerous idea isn't going to change the facts. On the other hand, Deborah Buckner writes that she is a parent and she was delighted that they were so open-minded at the public school system to have Dr. Hovind speak. As someone who believes in the divine creation, I resent and marvel at being classified with Nazis and an ancient people who believe the earth was flat. But says that she says that she's really happy. In November 2006, a federal jury found Kent Hovind guilty of 658 tax-related felony accounts and sentenced him to 10 years in prison. Following his imprisonment, his son, Eric Hovind, also a creationist, took control of the businesses and remade them into God Quest Incorporated, a holding corporation. Creation Today, a publishing house, and the Creation Store, a moneymaker. Hovind was released from federal custody 10 years later, almost 10 years later, with 3 years probation, and has restarted his creationism operation. There was further controversy on letters back and forth about his experiences on campus, in the public schools, and he actually wrote a letter by defending himself. And there was also a letter by Stan Guthrie, who was one of Gary McCracken's graduate students, a PhD student and an instructor, longtime instructor of biology at the University of Tennessee. That was sort of a pretty sarcastic satirical letter, and I encourage you to, if you pause it, to read. The Daily Beacon at the university also has gone through spurts of anti-evolution letters, including a 1995 candidate for SGA president who, while allowing that faculty could cover evolution in courses, said students should not be tested on the subject. Alternatively, he wanted any course that did test students on their knowledge of evolution to be flagged in the catalog, as this, quotes, offends students with profound religious beliefs. He did not win the election. There was also moved to have a Society for Creation Science at the University of Tennessee, and I found this in my files, a constitution. I don't know if it was ever formed or whatever happened to it, but it certainly is not in existence at the University of Tennessee at the current time. In January 2005, the Blount County School Board unanimously passed a resolution to include, quotes, a variety of scientific theories about origins. The vote happened quickly, without a word of opposition. Intelligent design was the focus. George Corda, a local conservative radio host, wanted to show a show on the issue, so broadcast a discussion involving Mia Knoxville and Paul Weldon, who called in, along with Glenn Jackson and Chris Wilhoit, who was previously a president of the East Tennessee Creation Science Association, two avowed young Earth creationists and advocates associated with the ETCSA. And it was on intelligent design, even though both of them were not adherents of intelligent design, but of young Earth creationism. The show was heard by quite a few folks locally. However, I was never able to get a recording from George Corda. But what was intelligent design? A, quote, new way to keep holding to creation without a literal interpretation of Genesis. The buzzword now became irreducible complexity. So here's the book that incited the modern intelligent design movement, Darwin's Black Box by Michael Behe. The main argument is that cells are too complicated to have evolved, and thus had to be designed by some intelligent outside entity. ID adherents typically avoid claiming God as the designer, but the implication is obvious. Now, intelligent design is not new. Its most prominent early proponent was William Paley, but there were prior discussions of the same idea. But intelligent design eliminates the need for a literal reading of Genesis and viewing the Bible as an infallible source of information. ID claims to use objective scientific methods to disprove evolution, though they often accept microevolution within the quotes created kinds. So we had a conference here down the street from the University of Tennessee at the Knoxville Convention Center in 2007 that had many of the major people still active in the intelligent design movement and the Discovery Center, including Michael Behe. I attended and sat through the entire event. For recent updates on this very active area, see the Discovery Institute's website, which has very interesting information. It deals not just with intelligent design, but has many links to culture and pseudoscientific issues, along with some reasonable attempts to deal with current scientific findings. They attempt to recruit published scientists, philosophers, and others skeptical of aspects of current evolutionary theory. Their strategy is to ignore that science is self-correcting, though, as I know from experience, it may take some time to successfully challenge entrenched views. There are also some mostly positive changes at the University of Tennessee, including the establishment of the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology in 1995. The story goes around that President Joe Johnson was sort of taken aback when he heard that we had a department on evolutionary biology at the University of Tennessee. Following the popularity of evolutionary psychology, we developed through the University Studies program a culture and evolution colloquy from about the years 1996 to 2003, involving at least 20 faculty from many departments. It folded from lack of administrative support. This followed a number of years later by the Center for Dynamics of Social Complexity, which was developed by Sergei Gavrilets, which also focused on evolution and also died when administrators pulled the plug. But it did have lots of funding, external funding for a while, and brought in great speakers. There were many on cultural and human evolution, as these from fall 2020 indicate. Darwin Day, one of the first in the country, was started in 1997 on campus by Massimo Pigliucci and a number of other faculty, and is still an annual campus event. Community Shares ran a Mardi Gras parade downtown for a number of years, and over 30 years ago, the biology departments had a float of the HMS Beagle, with Darwin throwing beads and candy from the prow to enthusiastic children. There were dozens of students and faculty of the university dressed as different life forms following it. Here, Darwin is with Thomas Huxley, his bulldog. Not only were courses on evolution, biology, and human evolution and society developed, but other institutions got involved, such as Maryville College down the road in Maryville, Tennessee. Even Zoo Knoxville, where all the early zoo directors resisted any signage mentioning evolution relationships, has changed. Lisa New, who received her master's degree in psychology at the University of Tennessee studying chimp behavior, eventually became the first scientist and female to be director and CEO of our local zoo. She implemented a more science-friendly policy without any apparent outcry. Inherit the Wind, the fictionalized film about the Scopes trial, has been shown here or produced here at the University of Tennessee campus in 2001, and it will be performed again next year on campus. And though fictionalized, has some pretty accurate scenes capturing the event and cultural setting. Darwin's 200th birthday in 2009 was celebrated on campus, and many had their photos taken with Darwin, who visited Knoxville again. We also held a Darwin Day teacher workshop for public school teachers to give them some up-to-date information on how to approach the evolution issue. I think this is something that we need to keep doing. In 2011, I was asked to participate in a conversation with Justin Barrett a major contributor to the evolutionary psychology of religion and who now lives in Knoxville. He carried out innovative experiments on the nature of how children attribute belief to supernatural entities or those not present. He gave the main presentation, and I responded with a more ethological and less functional perspective. But it was a quite congenial, although I did suggest that his ideas were at base similar to intelligent design. Until the audience question comment period, when somebody in the audience made a statement about how they had to teach their children, the Bible, and I made the comment that I think that young children are very vulnerable, and that when people in authority, such as parents, teachers, preachers, Sunday school teachers, tell them misinformation, if not lies, that this is intellectual abuse that I viewed as a very serious problem. The discussion ended pretty soon after that. Republicans took over state government, and at that time, they began to attempt to promote creationism in public schools. In 2007, State Senator Finney began agitating, resulted in a combined bill co-sponsored by our own Knoxville representative, Bill Dunn. It was allowed to become law without his signature in 2012 by Governor Haslam. The teaching of some scientific subjects, including but not limited to biological evolution, the chemical origins of life, global warming, and human cloning, can cause controversy, and thus no one should interfere with teachers trying to talk about these subjects. They need to learn about scientific evidence, develop critical thinking skills, respond appropriately. No education administrator should prohibit any teacher in a public school system of the state from helping students understand, analyze, critique, and review in an objective manner the scientific strengths and scientific weaknesses of existing scientific theories covering the course being taught. Apparently, learning from the Scopes trial, they added, this section only protects the teaching of scientific information. It should not be construed to promote any religious or non-religious doctrine or promote discrimination for or against religion or non-religion. Many UT faculty members opposed the law. The UT administration did not. In fact, an organization that I was involved with had letters opposing the law and that the university should take a stand against it. And I received a call at home by the chancellor, Jimmy Cheek, who then said, I want to talk to you about your opposition to this bill and that the university should do something about it. And I'd also like to have the president of the university on the call also. And so for the first and last time, I received such a call at home from the high administration, and they told me their reasons why they would not oppose the law. I will not go into those, but I consider them completely inappropriate for an academic institution. Jimmy Cheek did come through later, though, by inviting E.O. Wilson to receive an honorary degree in 2014 and to speak at commencement. He attended grad school here for a short time around 1950. Some of us were privileged to share a banquet with Ed at the McClung Museum. However, the UT website giving biographies of all UT honorary degree recipients conspicuously omits the word evolution from his biography. However, I encourage everybody to go down to Dayton, Tennessee. The courthouse in Dayton, where the Scopes trial took place, is a national landmark. The trial room preserved as it was then. The basement is a museum that's really quite wonderful. Besides a statue of Brian that was placed outside the courthouse on the left, on the right, recently there was a statue of Darrell, Clarence Darrell, installed, with funds provided by the ACLU and other groups. Bryan College was founded in Dayton, Tennessee, named after William Jennings Bryan, who died 3 days after the trial. And it was a school that still has a literal belief in creationism that all staff and faculty have to believe. If you look at number 1, we believe that the origin of man was by fiat of God, and this act of creation is reflected in the book of Genesis, that he was created in the image of God. He also notes at the bottom, recently in 2014, they added a codicil. We believe that all humanity is descended from Adam and Eve. They were historical persons created by God in a special formative act and not from previously existing life forms. There's a book available in 6 days in which one asks, can any scientist with a PhD believe in the idea of a literal 6-day creation? In 6 days, the book 6 Days answers this provocative question with 50 informative essays by scientists who say yes. And one of those scientists who said yes is Kurt Wise. He received his PhD with Stephen Jay Gould at Harvard. He's written on paleontology. He has 3 science degrees. He was a professor at Bryan College for many years and is now director of the Creation Research Center at Truett McConnell University in Cleveland, Georgia. In 1998, while he was teaching at Bryan College, I invited him to give a seminar at UT to talk about his views and interact with other scientists. He said, that sounds pretty interesting, but he was busy that fall, but he would get back to me, but he never did so. Kurt Wise also writes for the Creation Museum in Kentucky, which was founded by Ken Ham, who built and runs the Noah's Ark reconstruction in Kentucky that is supported by Kentucky taxpayers. Bryan College and Dayton is still home to several creationist organizations. As you can see here, you can even have a retreat near the Smoky Mountains. However, Dayton is another reason to visit Dayton is to go to the Monkeytown Brewing Company, which is actually quite good. Great food, and evolution theory is one of their best pours. Beauvais Lyons here at the University of Tennessee, who's organized the Scopes Centennial, actually has had exhibits in front of the Dayton courthouse, and even hawks fans, as was being done back in 1925. But what conclusions do I think we can draw from all these scattered and disparate stories, other than a history of gutless UT administrators? Several. Lesson 1 is to realize that for many in the United States today, truth, accuracy, honesty, and character are no longer the default core of our communal life, regardless of differences of opinion. The continuing strength of creationist-type thinking has pervaded the political sphere to the extent that leaders such as the current Speaker of the House is not only a young Earth creationist, but the federal Congress and our state government are riddled with those opposed not only to human evolution, vaccines, climate change, conservation, even birth control, and other areas where the science is strong. Although legitimate rational challenges to scientific conclusions are valuable, to this extent scientists and educators have failed, and the Scopes trial verdict lives. Indeed, creationism and ID bills are still being introduced in states, as the National Center for Science Education notes. They have a fine website that I encourage you to explore. But there are other lessons that take a deeper dive. Lesson 2 is to go back again to another passage from Pascal, who provided the epigraph for the 1925 book on science and religion and reality with which I began. If we submit everything to reason, our religion will have no mysterious or supernatural element. If we offend the principles of reason, our religion will be absurd and ridiculous. Now consider those opposed to all religions. Oscar Riddle, who was a PhD student of C.O. Whitman, a pioneer in animal behavior at the University of Chicago and also a founder of the field of ethology to which I devoted my life. He edited Whitman's posthumous papers, and I reprinted some of those in an edited book. And he was a pioneering endocrinologist who discovered prolactin. I met him when he returned to the University of Chicago to visit my advisor. But this book came out in 1954, and he had this statement. Unlike those, or this is my paraphrase, unlike those seeking some rapprochement between science and religion, he was convinced that virtually all current religious traditions were incompatible with scientific findings, particularly in accepting that evolutionary processes are essential in how humanity moves forward and progresses. His book presaged the, quotes, New Atheist tracts by Dawkins, Dennett, Sam Harris, Hitchens, and others from the late 2000s. These folks fail to accept that rationality is but a thin veneer over behavior systems millions of years in the making, and forgot Huxley's statement that religion of some type is necessary. Lesson 3. However, given the current way money influences our politics and religious propaganda, this comment from 70 years ago strikes me as prescient. Many thoughtful persons of today and the past 100 years have maintained that wealth is a powerful foe of change in both politics and religion. They have not failed to cite good evidence for this view. Within the United States at this moment, the teaching of fundamentalism is being rather heavily endowed by wealthy individuals, and even the power of quite modest wealth is otherwise and effectively expressed. Lesson 4. Is a form of deism returning? Deism is the 18th century view that God exists but merely created the world, set things in motion, and is letting it play out. No miracles, no afterlife, no personal intervention in our daily lives. Prayers, ritual, art, music, and such may provide comfort, solace, structure, community, peace, inspiration. Let everyone find their own path, as long as sectarian-derived moral codes are not imposed on others. Perhaps with the growth of the nuns and the spiritual but not religious cohorts, a de facto deism is emerging as a soft type of intelligent design. Now, the most prominent and famous deist was Voltaire, who also wrote, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." Lesson 5. Scientists and academics too often fail to realize that current truth, especially new facts, is often provisional and needs replication and close analysis. Scholars, including scientists as well as evolution deniers, often act as if they already know what is true and focusing their efforts and careers to finding data to confirm their views. They then do the most grotesque squirming to explain away unwelcome data. This leads to censorship left and right, harming the goal that university is a place for unfettered and open-minded research. This is a poster that, with a quotation from John Vincent Morley, that I had in my house for many years until it disintegrated. You have not converted a man because you have silenced him. Lesson 6. While those of us who think we are, quotes, the more rational ones and expect others to appreciate and incorporate scientific and factual knowledge into their belief systems and educational goals for their children, accepting that they might be wrong, so must the university community accept being wrong. In short, self-righteousness is a losing strategy. A few years ago, I ended an article in the journal Animal Behavior on some problems facing my field this way. While we can track where our scientific knowledge came from, where it is heading we do not know. Humility may not be common among scientists, but is essential for the most enduring science. Indeed, doubt is the seed corn of the scientific harvest, but it's also essential for theology, not to say surviving in a hostile world. Finally, note that doubt is part of this biblical passage that does accept essential kinship with our animal peers. From Ecclesiastes. I said in my heart with regard to human beings that God is testing them to show that they are but animals. For the fate of humans and the fate of animals is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and humans have no advantage over the animals. For all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust. All turn to dust again. Who knows whether the human spirit goes upward and the spirit of animals go downward to the earth? This humbling message has been forgotten or ignored by many on both sides of the creation-evolution issue, but is essential to understanding Darwin and the modern study of behavior, biology, psychology, religion, and the world we inhabit. And thus, I end by circling back to childhood questions about animal souls and heaven. And I believe that God, as well as geneticists, would accept that monkeys and bugs and flies have some influence on our own biology. Thank you.
Oh, there ain't no bugs on me. There ain't no bugs on me. There may be bugs on some of you mugs, but there ain't no bugs on me.
Now the monkey swings by the end of his tail as he flies from tree to tree. There may be monkey in some of you guys, but there ain't no monkey in me.
Oh, there ain't no bugs on me. There ain't no bugs on me. There may be bugs on some of you mugs, but there ain't no bugs on me.
Oh, the Judy bug comes in June, and the lightning bug comes in May. Bed bug comes just any old time, but he doesn't come to stay.
Oh, there ain't no bugs on me. There ain't no bugs on me. There may be bugs on some of you mugs, but there ain't no bugs on me.
Billy Sunday is the preacher, his church is always full. The people come from miles around just to hear him shoot the bull.
Oh, there ain't no flies on me. There ain't no flies on me. There may be flies on some of you guys, but there ain't no flies on me. And there ain't no bugs on me. There ain't no bugs on me. There may be bugs on some of you mugs, but there ain't no bugs on me.